one of the sweetest things about doing this consciousness coaching and working with clients is what I hear a lot is even though the work isn't centered on me, I share myself. I share my shadow. I share my mistakes. I share patterns. And what ends up happening is it creates this space where we just all get to be really human.
Welcome to Evolutionary, a podcast about how we can restore balance and heal the world. Every episode of my show, we explore the future of humanity and how we've gotten to where we are today. Through inspirational stories about healing, science, and mysticism, we'll see how we can reshape our society to create a world free of violence. I'm your host, Hawah Kasat. At just 17 years old, during her senior year of high school, Ruthie's life changed dramatically outside of a Louisiana gas station when she was struck by an ambulance that was traveling over 60 miles an hour. The accident resulted in severe injuries that nearly claimed her life. Miraculously, walking out of the hospital within a month, Ruthie's battle with pain was just beginning. Years of chronic pain followed, compounded by dependency on painkillers and the crumbling of her personal world. Yet it was the discovery of a wire piercing her brainstem, which was a remnant from her initial surgery, that marked the beginning of true healing. As Ruthie prepared for the life-saving procedure that would finally correct this, she faced the loss of her father and the end of her marriage. But within these profound losses lay the seeds of rebirth. Ruthie chose to change her narrative from one of suffering to one of joy and reconnection with the world. She traded fentanyl for sunsets, morphine for the simple joy of wildflowers by the roadside, using her body not as a vessel for pain, but as a bridge to the world. Now a celebrated speaker, author, and podcast host, Ruthie travels the globe sharing her story, empowering others to find purpose in their pain and beauty in their brokenness. Her memoir, There I Am, The Journey from Hopelessness to Healing, not only chronicles her story, but serves as a beacon of hope for those traversing the dark night of the soul. Join me today on this episode of Evolutionary as we embark on an extraordinary conversation with Ruthie Lindsey to talk about the depths of despair, the truth of healing, and the peaks of spiritual awakening. Ruthie, thank you so much for saying yes and for joining me on the Evolutionary podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for including me. It's such an honor to be able to share this space with you. And I'm just so grateful and appreciative that you asked me.
You have lived such a full life. I would love to start with you sharing a little bit with me and our listeners. How and what has the accident, what has it taught you? What has it brought into your life right now as you've been healing from it and you continue to heal from it? What is the lesson that you're carrying right now?
Thank you. I love that question because honestly, if we had talked even 4 or 5 years ago, this whole thing would have been around my pain story. I was very identified with this pain story for a long, long time. And I think that was a natural part of it. And I trust that part of my journey. But now I love sitting with everything that pain has invited me into, because I think in our culture, physical pain and emotional pain, it's very medicalized. And it's like, let me give you a Band-Aid for this and a Band-Aid for this. And I did all the things, I was on every narcotic under the sun for so many years. I did everything that Western medicine told me to do. And I was just getting worse and worse and more miserable. And my friend Jamie Lee Finch, she's an embodiment coach. She says loud bodies are really loving bodies. And my body just was louder and louder and louder and louder. And I got so unwell for so long, living in a bed for 7 years, addicted to all these narcotics, that I wanted to die for a really long time. And ultimately, it sent me on a journey. It sent me on this unlearning journey. For the longest time, I would not believe that any of my issues were anything out of physiological, because I'm like the only human in the world that's had a wire pierce their brainstem. And if someone had told me that there was probably emotional pieces to this, I would have wanted to kick them to the freaking moon. 'Cause I'm like, bitch, I don't want
Right.
to pierce my brain. Like I couldn't go there yet. But ultimately, it sent me on such a deep unlearning and remembering journey. And I would have told you for the longest time that all the pain I had started with the day of that car accident. And I did a lot of work around that, but I was still really, really, really unwell. And so that sent me on a journey of learning about pre-verbal trauma and so much that happened in childhood that I couldn't look at for a long time, and understanding like I wasn't able to feel a lot of emotions in my home, and we got whipped. And if I had big feelings, like that was not okay unless they were sweet, kind, gentle, and precious. And so I had to unlearn that my emotions were bad, or that there were certain, I was a part of a church that told me I was a broken, depraved wretch. And so unlearning these stories of my brokenness, of my depravity, that certain emotions were sinful or evil or bad, or that I was sinful or evil or bad, and remembering my innate worthiness, that all of my parts belong, that all of my emotions get to be here. And I would say today, I don't even call myself on a healing journey. I'd say I'm on a wholeness journey, because wholeness means allowing all of my parts to be here, the parts that are anxious and depressed or numb or avoidant or jealous or insecure or whatever it is, controlling. Like when I learned how to be with these parts and not feel over identified with them, and to commune with them and nurture them and love on them, that has been one of the most beautiful rememberings that I'm worthy because I freaking exist, not because of what I do in this world. And that is so opposite of what culture tells us, usually what family tells us, what the church tells us. And so I can hold two things at once. And it's been really brutal and really painful. And I wanted to die for a very, very, very long time. And all of this loud pain, emotional, physical, spiritual, has sent me on the deepest, holiest, sacred journey of remembering my innate worth, that I'm deserving. If I never did another thing on this planet, I'm loved and I am loved and I'm worthy. And the more I remember this, the more I know that connectivity and that truth for all beings coming back into this body that I hated for so long, and I believed hated me when it got really loud.
Why did you hate your body so much? And this is pre-accident you're talking about. You're saying that you were really having some resentment towards your body. And I remember reading about that early in your book, There I Am, about how you were feeling really ashamed of your body in some ways. What was it that you hated about your body and yourself?
I love that question because it feels so different than how I feel today, but it was so instilled in me. Like the only reason bodies were ever talked about in my home is if they're skinny, pretty, fat, or ugly. And you can imagine what was the acceptable one. You needed to be skinny and pretty, and that makes you desirable and worthy and all the things. And if you weren't, God help us. And there was a lot of mocking around bodies, and everyone was doing the best they could. I can hold those two things at once too. But my mom was just a very gorgeous woman. And so she got a lot of identity in her beauty. And that got her out of a lot of painful scenarios with her childhood. And I think aging was probably pretty painful for her. And then I'm her only daughter. And so a lot of focus was put on how I looked, what my body looked like, needing to be a certain size, needing to look a certain way. Each day when I'd come home, my mom would say, "What did they say about you today? They say how pretty you were. What did they say about your outfit?" And I learned that my worth is in what the right people say about my body, about the things that I'm doing. And so I learned a lot of self-hatred about bodies. I just beat the hell out of myself. I mean, I had disordered eating starting at a very, very young age. And it also got a lot worse after my car accident because it was the one thing I could control. It's like everything felt out of control. I had no tools. I didn't do any therapy around it, but I could control how much I was eating and what size my body was when everything felt so out of control outside of me. And for the longest time, I felt so much shame because it also moved into bulimia. And that was short lived, but mostly binging. Like I binged for a large majority of my life. And I hated that part of me because it was like I was trying to fill this wound, but then society says if you gain weight, something's wrong with you. And so I shamed the hell out of myself because I would want to just stuff and stuff and stuff because I was also trying to regulate myself. I was trying to ground myself with food. None of this was conscious.
Right. So like that shame is something that it's so widespread right now in terms of our society, our culture. There feels to be high levels of shame and pressure to look a certain way, to act a certain way, to talk a certain way. As a coach, as a teacher, as a guide, how do you support people in figuring out how to unlearn and how to embrace their authenticity as they are without trying to be someone other than who they are, different than who they are? How are you helping us find that like relearning?
Honestly, it's been really incredible and beautiful. I only share the things that I have needed desperately for myself, and being so unwell for so long, it sent me on quite the journey. And so I share the things that have moved the needle the most for me. And so for me, one of the sweetest things about doing this consciousness coaching and working with clients is it's been really interesting. I'd say probably half or a little bit more of my clients are therapists and coaches. And what I hear a lot is even though the work isn't centered on me, I share myself. I share my shadow. I share my mistakes. I share patterns. And what ends up happening is it creates this space where we just all get to be really human. Because I think so often teachers or spiritual leaders, it's like we feel this pressure of, I need to have it all together. And it's such a disservice to us because I have yet to meet a completely awakened human that like has no shadow. I believe that I'm going to be human until the day I'm back in between. And so bright as your light is as big as your shadow is going to be. It's a part of me. And so pretending as though I don't have these parts doesn't serve anyone. It creates this hierarchy a little bit. And so I share myself and I share the humanness that shame sits at my table too. And fear has been a part of everything I've done my entire life. And it's me learning how to not let it be in the driver's seat. It gets to be here. It gets to have a voice. I talk to fear all the time. I talk to all these different parts all the time. It's not like they all went away. They're in me. It's just, am I letting them be in the driver's seat?
I love how you threaded together the ways that we all have the potentiality for every emotion, every feeling, whether that's like love and kindness, or whether that's anxiety and jealousy and envy, because I think there's so much of us denying parts of ourselves, especially like those that are trying to be extremely positive all the time, like toxic positivity, and always trying to put on a face of like, everything's great, everything's doing wonderful, and I'm perfect. But that's almost denying an important part of what makes us human. And I actually think what that can even cause is it can cause more polarization and fractures within relationships and society, because then there's people that feel that they're better than or more holy than thou. And that creates a very sort of oppressive us versus them dichotomy where my way is right, your way is wrong. So humanizing even ourselves as healers and teachers, or as people that are all just on the path trying to get whole again, as you said, how do we become whole again? Which is a question that I have, and it's been sitting with me for a long time, is as the journey towards wholeness, I think, almost requires remembering that we are whole to begin with, and knowing that we actually are whole. We've just forgotten the actual essence of who we are, which is whole. So our pain is rooted in this illusion that we are not whole. when we are.
Totally. And I was talking about this with a client this morning. It's like, I don't believe in a physical place called hell, but I know hell. I've lived in hell in this body as Ruthie in this life because I believe it's the illusion of separation. It's like that something is inherently bad and wrong with me and I'm all alone and no one understands. And I think pain, emotional, physical, spiritual pain, which everyone on this planet knows, if you're human, it can tell us the story is I'm alone. I am bad. Something is inherently wrong with me. And it creates this illusion, this separation from our bodies, from others, from Mama Earth, who we are the earth, right? From these birds, from the trees and the plants that are all around this room. Like, I'm not separate from those, but my illusion of separation creates that feeling of hell. And that's why I love even the statement, like, I am on a wholeness journey, is I'm remembering that every single part of me belongs here. And everything I said that bothers me, I've done at times. Like, I have thought I was better than people and I'm more awakened and I'm more conscious. And that's in me too. And even recognizing my little ego and recognizing my judgment and recognizing these parts, I am above nothing. Like, I am not beyond anything.
We're specks of dust.
Yes, but I also love the Rumi quote. He's like, you think you're a drop in the ocean, but you're actually an ocean and a drop. Like, we are these divinely amazing extensions of the divine, and we're just little specks of sand that are just playing this role with billions of other people. And it's humbling and it's empowering. And I think that wholeness remembering is not just remembering that the sweet parts of me or the gentle parts of me or the fruits of the spirit or whatever we were taught, because those are all in me too. Holy shit, 100%.
What's crazy too, and it's kind of what you were saying earlier, which just has me thinking about like how the smallest thing environmentally that could happen in our lives could turn us in a whole different trajectory. Like, we may have all of our shit together and where everything is great and we're kind and we're compassionate and all of these things are in flow. And then all of a sudden there's a death in our family and then we lose our job and a third thing happens to us. And now it's like we're mean and we're angry and we're upset and we're short fused and short tempered. So it's like we have the potential to shift really rapidly as well, I think, from emotion to emotion. And having space for that and spaciousness for knowing when it comes up is really important. I've been playing with like when I notice if like jealousy comes up or something for me, I play with the opposite of the emotion. So if I notice that there's like something that comes up, I'm feeling like envious towards somebody for something that they're doing that I'm like, oh, I wish I was able to do that. I actually like, I recognize that, I see that, I acknowledge it, and then I begin to now cheer them on because I see what came up and then I'm like, okay, how can I bring a balancing energy to that?
I think that's so powerful because you're not making yourself bad for having those very human feelings, but even switching the narrative of like, maybe this is just a message of something that's a blessing for them, but doesn't mean that that's not for me too. Because I think it's so easy to think they get to have that. That means I don't.
That's exactly right. Coming back to the idea around not just healing, but we're on a journey towards wholeness. You've overcome so much in your life through the accident. And I also know through conversations we've had in person that you're still in a lot of chronic pain. And I know that many people in the world live with chronic pain. It's a story that many people can relate to. How are you currently in your life as you journey towards wholeness? Do you see wholeness as a place where you're no longer in pain?
Again, I think wholeness is allowing all these parts to be here without over-identifying with them. Truest essence is just love. That's who I am. I am love. Chronic pain has been a loud visitor in my life for 25 years. And I don't know that in this life, I'll ever be completely pain-free. I might. I stay so open to miracles, but this pain, my body getting louder and louder and more miserable, has ultimately invited me into is more tenderness towards my body, of listening to her, of having more compassion for her. I just turned 45 last week.
Yay, happy birthday.
Thank you. 40s are like, I wouldn't go back for anything. I used to be so afraid of 40s and thinking that was so old or aging or wrinkles. And I'm like, what a crock of bullshit we were about aging. I'm like, indigenous cultures were worshiping the crone. Now I'm like, I can't wait to be a crone. Give me that white hair. I can't wait. Anyway, but I did this thing where I spent the morning of my birthday, I watched the sunrise and had this sweet, sweet experience. But then I went and I did I have this Ayurvedic Vata oil, and I just massaged and I blessed every part of my body. All these parts some are really loud. And I remember getting to my neck and I just was like rubbing my neck and just thanking her. I'm like, first off, you're a miracle. Like, I shouldn't be alive. I shouldn't be walking. I shouldn't have brain functioning. And yeah, there's a lot of pain, but this neck, again, I'm holding two things at once because this is not me putting a Band-Aid over painful experiences. But she has sent me on the most beautiful, awakening, conscious journey.
I feel like for me, part of the power of healing is the word and the vibration of the word and the language we use to describe ourselves. And for me, and I think for those listening right now, if you are in chronic pain, if you have chronic pain physically somewhere in your body, one thing that's coming up for me right now, Ruthie, as you speak, is the act of putting your hand to the part of your body that is screaming really loud and rubbing it with a little bit of massage oil, or taking a moment and saying, it's okay, I got you, using positive affirmations, because I do think our body physically, the cellular structure of the body reacts to the vibration of our thoughts. And so we can cycle and spin into really negative spaces within our minds, which then will translate into the physical embodiment of some sort of disease, which is dis-ease of the mind. So the dis-ease in the mind is forming disease in the body. And so we do have to work at a really granular level, like the granular level of the thoughts, of the emotions. And even though the emotions that come up are all inclusively a part of being human, there are some emotions, and tell me how you feel about this, please, but I'm wondering, there are some emotions that are probably going to spin us into cycles of negativity that then could result in us having an increase in physical ailment and pain. What's your thought on that?
I think that both and too. So let's say fear, or I'm spinning out. I'm fearing what's going to happen. How am I going to live like this for the rest of my life? And it can cause me more pain if I'm not actually letting myself process the whole emotion and be with. And one of the things I like to say a lot, and my girlfriend Amelia and I talk about this a lot, what does it look like to be with? Because if I actually meet fear with compassion and kindness and gentleness, fear actually alchemizes and moves from kind of the driver's seat into its little high chair over. It's still at my table. It's still here. But all of a sudden, love gets to be more of the driver. And then I get to tell myself truer things. So I think a lot of times what happens is these parts of us will come up. Let's say fear. Let's just say that's the one. And then in the Buddhist teaching, it's like becoming the second arrow. It's oftentimes we feel fear, but then we shame ourselves for being fearful. Or we feel anxiety, and then we become our second wound because we shame ourselves for feeling anxious, or shame ourselves for feeling controlling, or name it. I've done it, all of it. And that keeps us in that cycle. It keeps us wanting to numb. It keeps us in our patterns. It keeps us feeling shitty about ourselves and telling ourselves, I'm bad. This shouldn't be the way it is. But there's something about being with what's there and not making it bad, not making it unholy, not making it whatever it is my story tells me, recognizing it's there, feeling it. And then when I actually allow myself to process it and feel it and hold it with compassion, then I get to tell myself a truer story. then I get to actually nurture that part of myself and actually lean into a truer, more expansive story of what actually I believe is true, what my higher self, God, universe, divine, male, whatever you want to call it, says about me. But for me, I'm so down to be wrong about anything and I'm so down to have my mind changed. But what's worked for me so far is not trying to deny it or make myself wrong for having the thought or the feeling or the expression that I do have. And instead being with it with compassion and tenderness is the only thing that allows it to shift. It's like, if I don't, I hold on tighter. I want to numb more because I'm just beating the shit out of myself for having this human experience. And I think that's why I love shadow work so much. Like shadow work says these unconscious parts, we actually get to love on them to help move them. No one on this planet that I've ever met has ever healed through shame. Ever, 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 ever. So me shaming myself for having these parts isn't going to shift it.
I was going to repeat what you said. No one on this planet has ever healed from shame.
No, never. It can toxically motivate us. I mean, we've seen what happens on the football field and the coach grabbing a kid's helmet like, okay, yes, sir, I'll be good. I'll be good. Is he healing? That doesn't shift us. It can toxically motivate, but it doesn't shift us from the inside out. It makes us want to fit in this box more. I know shame drove me being the goodest good girl that ever good girl growing up. I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I didn't have sex, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. And I just was like, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, because I was toxically motivated. I didn't want to get in trouble. I had the fear of God and my dad. I didn't want to get a whipping. I didn't want to get in trouble like my brother did. I wanted to belong and receive love. So I learned how to fit in this little tiny box. You know, I'm 6'1", and so I'm folded into this itty bitty box to be the goodest good girl. And that kept me unwell for a really long time. And I understand that it was all in the name of belonging, which is what we're hardwired for. So it's scary to break out of that.
We're so hardwired to want to belong and to fit in. And I love it because in the beginning of your book, you write a lot about those early childhood pressures that we all feel, no matter who you are, where you are, wanting to fit in and belong to a social group or to have friends. There's probably nothing more important as a kid is to fit in and belong. And we'll do things that we don't want to do all the time just so that we're accepted. And we deny our authentic selves because we try so hard to be what other people want us to be. And in the process, we lose ourselves by trying to be what other people want us to be. Ruthie, you recently posted on your Instagram timeline about a 20-year wedding anniversary that you would have been celebrating this October, and you are not celebrating this 20-year wedding anniversary. And so I'm wondering if you would be willing to share a little bit about how you have been using all these tools of acceptance and learning how to become and remember your wholeness. How are you finding an invitation of this moment of this 20-year anniversary to propel you into more reflection in your life?
Thanks for that question. It's interesting. When I got divorced, my husband left in 2013, and he ended up with a really good friend of mine at the time. And being the goody good girl that I had been very conditioned to be at the time, I'm like, no, you just forgive and you let it go. But of course I felt anger. Of course I felt sadness, and I swallowed it. At the time I would have told you, I don't get angry, I just get sad. Of course, anger is a core emotion. Every human on planet Earth, like anger is sacred. There is a really important place for anger. And it wasn't until much later that I had to learn how to process and let myself really express some emotions around anger and abandonment and sadness and hurt. So none of what I'm about to say is a Band-Aid. I have let myself feel those emotions. But I remember being in this like pretty deep meditation years ago. And what I also want to say right here is I'm so down to be wrong about everything I say. And if it helps me love myself and others more, I don't care. I don't care if I'm wrong. If it gives me more endearment and love for myself and other people, I don't care.
And you've said that now twice, and I love it that you're just willing to be wrong, and that's okay. I know I'm going to be wrong. Half the things I say are probably maybe probably more than half. And that's okay. I don't have to be right. I just have to feel and know that my feelings are real.
Yes. And those things are inviting you into a truer version of yourself. But anyway, I was in this deep meditation and I saw the three of our souls, me, my ex-husband, and the woman that he ended up with.
Who was one of your friends?
A really good friend of mine at the time. Yeah.
Okay, that's painful. That sounds really intense. I'm sorry that you had to go through that.
Thank you. It was really, really brutal at the time. And it hit all my abandonment wounds and all my stories. And I had this vision, and our souls, before we came back to Earth School, were all there. And we all made this little pact that we would play this role for each other and that it would be this part of our awakening and coming back home to ourselves. And I see my ex-husband. It's interesting. My partner and I today, we pray for him every single night. It's from a really endearing place. I thank God for the role he played. I thank God that he left me. It doesn't mean it wasn't painful, but I could not be the woman sitting across from you today. I would still be so parked in a lot of stories. I couldn't expand in that marriage the way my soul wanted to expand. I would not be doing this work that I'm doing today. There's so many things that I just don't believe that I would have been invited into being and remembering about myself if I'd stayed in that marriage. And he played this very important role for my soul and my soul's awakening. And I believe that she played the perfect role too, because he had to think there was something outside of this that was better to leave me for. And it had to happen. And again, who cares if I'm wrong? I remember just bawling, crying, and just thanking their souls. And I saw her 2 or 3 summers ago at a wedding, and I just went straight to her and gave her a big hug. And I remember her kind of tearing up, and it was just all spur of the moment. And I ended up inviting her over to do a tea ceremony with me. And I remember praying before she came over and just being like, universe, God, divine, just let her be free, because I feel free. And then I started crying so hard because I was like, Ruthie, I love your heart. That's so kind. I remember just giggling at myself. I'm like, I love that that's your heart, because it was so earnest. And she came and I was like, I want you to be free. I am so good. And you played this perfect role. And listen, none of this is saying I have boundaries. Are we good friends? No, we're not in each other's days out lives. I'm not an idiot. And it holds no power over me. I see her out and about in my neighborhood with their daughter, and it doesn't hold power over me anymore. And I want every being to be free.
Wait, hold on. They still live in your neighborhood? You all live in the same neighborhood?
I don't know exactly where they live, but I see them in my neighborhood. I see them in my park.
Wow. So you're physically reminded often of it. So you've really had to let it go, let it go.
To be honest, my ex-husband and I want to also hold this truth too. We got married because we felt guilty for having sex. We were like good little Christians. I worked at a church. I don't know that I actually ever fully loved him. I thought I did. But now this relationship I have today, this is the first time I've actually known what it is to really open my heart to receive love, to be able to give love, to allow all of his parts to be here. And it's a very different type of love. We were very, very, very young. But in the same breath, I'm so grateful for that man. I don't question that. I don't think that time was wasted. I learned so much. He also sat with me. I lived in my bed 7 years of that marriage with him. He was with me. Bless his soul. I can't even imagine how painful, how brutal. My pain was always bigger than his. There wasn't room for him to feel much pain. Mine was always bigger. I can't imagine how painful that was. This pain started a year for him. We had no tools. We were babies. And how do you navigate that? The wire that was in my brain started a year into our marriage.
Your ex-husband, you knew him before the car accident?
No. So I had the car accident when I was 17. And then a year into our marriage, when I was probably like 24, is when the wire pierced my brainstem from it breaking. So the pain moved in about a year into our marriage.
And that's when you were like confined to bed for like the next 7 years because you were in so much chronic pain.
I was in so much chronic pain. And you know what I've also learned through doing shadow work, and this just feels true. I was in so much pain that is very real. I mean, there was a wire piercing my brainstem. I was in debilitating pain. And all of a sudden, I got to stop showing up to a life that I didn't really want to be a part of anymore. I felt homesick on this planet most of my life. This place has always felt freaking insane to me. I didn't have words for that. Now I'm like, and I incarnated here for a reason to fully embody and have all these experiences. But at the time, I'm on the highest level of fentanyl, morphine, hydrocodone, just name it. And so all of a sudden I get to lay in a bed, I get to watch trashy TV all day, I get to eat my feelings all day, and I get to take narcotics, and I get to check out from life, and no one's asking anything of me. I don't have to show up at this church where I don't really believe in the things that I'm talking about. This marriage that I thought would save me and make me feel better, I don't have to really show up for that anymore. I don't have to show up to this life. And as much as I was miserable, because I was in hell and miserable and in so much pain, there was also a part of me that really loved not having to show up to a life that didn't feel good to me anymore. And I had like a get out of jail free card for everything. And I got a lot of care. I got a lot of that I was desiring. I got a lot of compassion. I got a lot of empathy. And so the beauty of shadow work is understanding there was something in me that really loved not having to show up.
I feel like relationships are something that we can all really deeply relate to. I think all have been, in some way, shape, or form, betrayal and feeling really hurt is a very common experience for us all. Do you have any suggestions for listeners that have recently or still healing from some broken marriage, divorce, relationship that have been hurt? I mean, what are some ways to find this deep loving kindness that you all of a sudden have generated for, even for your ex-husband? Because it sounds like you're still deeply care for him, even though he hurt you a lot. And that's hard to do.
And I hurt him a lot.
And you hurt him a lot. Interesting.
100%. I could not emotionally show up for him. Like, I emotionally wasn't there for him because I couldn't emotionally be there for myself. I fully see my part in us getting to that place. I think it takes the time it takes. I will say that. This was not an overnight. He left in 2013. We're in 2024. This has been a process over many years to be able to arrive at this place. And you have to let yourself go through the motions. There's probably going to be blame. There's probably going to be bitterness. There's going to be anger. There's going to be grief. There's going to be sadness. There's going to be loss. There's going to be a real anger that this is not the life I signed up for. All of that is so human. It's so human. So often when people leave or left, it's really hard to see your role in anything. And it's really interesting when I'm listening to people talk about relationships ending, all of a sudden that person is the devil incarnate and they are a narcissist and they did everything wrong. And it's hard for people to really recognize their role in getting there. So have that season. If that's where you are, it's not a very fun season, but it's a part of the season. And I think it's okay, but not wanting to stay there. And you have to let yourself feel those things and having safe people in your life where you can process those things. I would also say be really protective of who you are talking about those things with, because it might be the father of your children or the mother of your children. I think it's Nadia Bolz-Weber talks about like not speaking from the open wound, but speaking from the scar, not sharing when you're in this gushing out wounded place publicly. I don't think that ever really serves us, and it doesn't serve the other person. So only doing that with your therapist and your closest, most intimate people that can hold space for you, but also speak loving truth to you. Because I think we get kind of blinded in those areas. It's really hard to see when you're especially fresh out of something, your role. But I think processing, feeling, holding it with people that are really close to you. I made a point when my husband left, I talked a lot with one sibling and not as much with another sibling, because if we did get back together, I knew this one sibling would be able to forgive and the other one might have had a harder time. And so I was really careful. I made a conscious choice. I didn't want to ever speak ugly about them publicly. I was really careful of who I did share really the painful parts. that was important to me. I'm not projecting that on anyone else because if you have, that's very human. But that was something that I just made the decision of early on. And I think another really important part was letting myself be angry, letting myself be mad, letting myself feel the rejection, letting myself feel the abandonment, letting myself feel all the things. I don't think I could have come to a really forgiving, truly forgiving place if I hadn't let myself feel all of those. And I had really close people process all of that with me.
So having a support system around you, knowing who to share what with vulnerably. And then it sounds like to me like there was a big part of you at some point that began to really think and reflect upon your own role. Your healing, your forgiving of your ex-husband was also a acknowledgement in some way, shape, or form of your own part of being somebody in the relationship that's contributing in whatever ways, both positive and negative, holding both. And that's hard. That's hard for people to do because
It is not easy.
it's not easy to be like, oh yeah, I might have contributed to this.
If you're human, you did.
Well, it goes back to what we started with when we were talking about like, none of us are perfect. If you haven't listened to podcast episode 10, please go back and hear podcast episode 10 about imperfection. And yeah, none of us are perfect. We are fooling ourselves if we think we are.
Or even holding ourselves to that. It's such a disservice.
Yeah. And it's the source of more pain. And part of being whole is recognizing our imperfectness, I think.
And forgiving myself for the mistakes. I made so many mistakes as a 22-year-old little girl that was really unwell and really asleep and really unconscious. And I think it's so interesting. I say this to myself and to my clients a lot. I believe we come to Earth School to learn, to learn lessons. And yet we beat the shit out of ourselves for the lessons that we're learning. We're gonna make so many mistakes. I don't know about you, but the deepest shifting and learnings that I've ever had came through me fucking it up, failing, making mistakes, making unconscious decisions, hurting people. That has brought me the deepest level of learning. And I don't believe it's ever a failure if you learn from it. Now, my human self can beat myself up about it and tell me like, you shouldn't have done that and I shouldn't have effed that up and I shouldn't have messed that up. But my truer, higher, evolved, higher self knows that's how I learn. And I get to be human and I'm going to make mistakes. And if I'm in relationship with someone, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to hurt people. I'm going to be unconscious at times. I'm going to be in my patterns at times. And I really think they say it's not about the rip, it's about the repair. And that repair is the holiest, most healing thing, is learning how to repair and to own your mistakes, but not shame yourself for them. It's such a dance and it's very nuanced.
It's not about the rip. It's about the repair. Because things are going to rip. Things are going to tear, whether we want them to or not. I mean, come on, people. As time goes on, the fabric gets thinner and thinner. The thread starts to unravel and things will rip, things will tear. And the question is, what's our commitment? What's our true commitment to healing and repairing and restoring our relationships? We live in a world right now where we are missing this skill. And you write about this in your book as well, about how there's different kinds of smart. And I love that because a lot of what I did early in my career through education was trying to demystify how we have boxed intelligence and smartness into these one or two categories. If you're doing it this way, there's like A and B, and these are the only two ways to be smart. And I think it causes a lot of pain. Like back to the theme of pain, it causes a lot of pain for not just children, but adults. I mean, because adults are big children. We're just big children that are carrying all the pain of being children. And the pain of being a child is being really smart at something, being really intelligent, but that intelligence and that smartness not being valued or recognized by society or by school systems and institutions. And the intelligence of being gifted kinesthetically or musically or artistically or spatially, like that doesn't fall into the type of intelligence that gets you into these like CEO positions or these positions that are considered the most prominent positions in society. So I am feeling that the smartness of relationship, the intelligence of repair, the restoring of our relationship is the missing intelligence right now for humanity. That comes up for me a lot. And I want to see more of it. I want to see more people like you out there speaking and teaching and helping hold us into these containers of breathing together and becoming whole again together, which is recognizing our humanity together and seeing our humanity again. That's crucial.
100%. Twofold. Like I was horrible in school. School was so hard for me, but I had this very high emotional intelligence, but that you couldn't test that. So one of my oldest wounds was I'm not smart. I'm not intelligent. I believed that probably until my early 30s. I really believed that for the longest time, which is, my God, what a lie. So I love that you brought that up. But then secondly, I know that if we want change outside of us, it has to be an inside job first. Every ism is about a body. It has something to do with a body. And so if I'm disconnected from my own body and hating my own body and judging the shit out of my parts and thinking I have to behave a certain way to be good and worthy, deserving, I'm going to place that judgment times more on other people outside of myself. And I'm going to feel that othering for people outside of me. And so that's why I'm also so passionate about embodiment work, because the more I am connected with tenderness inside of my own body and honoring the personhood of my own body, the more I'm not going to believe in othering someone else. These people on Capitol Hill, do you think they're embodied? Like anytime there's this us against them, they might have Ivy League education. Like who gives a shit? If like you hate your own body, you're going to hate other people. If you think that you're a dominant body and you need to look this way and have this sexuality, whatever it is.
And demonstrate this power and demonstrate your force and your courage. And right, you have to put on a persona. You're automatically moving us into deeper disillusionment in who we could be as people.
It's that dualistic thinking. It's that us against them. I'm not to get into politics at all because who wants to waste our time?
And it's not a waste of time, right? Of course. It is and it's not, because it's like, yes, and holding both of those truths, it's like anything we do is political, whether we want it to be or not. Where we decide to buy our food, what what companies we're supporting, what we're doing with solar panels or not, like all those are ultimately political decisions as well, right?
But it's just such a dualistic thing. So we're the good guys and we're the bad guys, or they're the bad guys, but the bad guys think that they're the good, and there's no nuance whatsoever at all. It's so us against them. And it's just, I don't want to play in that field. I know my vote matters and I'm going to vote in a way that I think is the best option, but I also see that dualism over, and that doesn't move the needle, I don't believe.
So would you have a message for humanity right now? Let's say, like, we've been talking a lot about personal pain and moving towards wholeness in relationships now as well. I mean, thank you for really opening up about your ex-husband. That's really powerful. And kind of zooming out even a little further, is there a final message that you might have in terms of all that you're integrating, all that you've learned into this beautiful 45 revolution around the sun moment? Like, is there some message that you would have for us as humanity?
I feel like with my work and for myself and with my clients, I'm like, let's look for 1 degree shifts. 1 degree shift. But like, that's actually sustainable. And what if that 1 degree shift is, how can I be a little more tender and compassionate with myself today? How can I meet whatever comes up for me, the depression, the overwhelm, the whatever, with a little more kindness and tenderness and compassion? And that was one of my biggest hopes for my 45th year, is how can I just be a little softer, a little more tender with myself? Because what I know is the more I am tender with my own body and my own inner world, the more tender I am externally with the world. And so if we want to be change in the world, it starts with compassion and tenderness for ourselves. And That feels so upside down from what I was taught. I was taught that was selfish, that's navel gazing, you're thinking about yourself too much. And I think that's a lie. And what could be just a little more tenderness that you could offer to yourself today? Maybe it's looking in the mirror and hearing yourself judge your wrinkles or your sunspots or think you're too fat or judging yourself or judging past mistake. And how can you meet that part with like, oh, sweet Ruthie, you're doing a really good job. How can I hold that space for you? How can I love on that part of you just a little bit more, with a little bit more compassion and a little bit more tenderness? That's a huge thing. It's huge. It's so much bigger than we even give it credit for.
Thank you for sharing that. That gave me chills. And it's that 1 degree shift. It's like we are shooting for the stars, but it's like one step at a time. It's like we're not going to have the whole cake overnight. It's like we've got to be willing to take incremental change. And that's the big difference between me now and me 20 years ago in my life. I think when I was a younger activist, a younger revolutionary in my own way, I wasn't satisfied with small changes. I wasn't satisfied with just the incremental steps. I want to see it all tonight, tomorrow. This has got to happen by next month. And for better or for worse, like time, it has kind of like softened a little bit in terms of how quickly I expect change to happen. And I think that's like, it's okay. I think there's a place for both. I think there's a real place and there's a need for that youthful idealism. It's the youthful idealism that took the civil rights movement and took it to the end zone and threw the Hail Mary pass and made it happen. And there's a beautiful kind of step-by-step, 1 degree at a time piece that makes it really realistic as well, because it could set us up for failure too if we're not willing to take the small wins when we can get them. That's why I voted as well. Like you got to take the small wins and you got to keep holding the right people accountable.
I love what Martha Beck says about that. And she talks about the eagle and the mouse. And I remind myself of it a lot because it's very easy for me to zoom out and see the big picture of what I want. My dreams I have for myself, my dreams I have for our country, the dreams I have for my partnership, for the world, for animals in this world, and for humans. It's very easy to like zoom out. But then she talks about, that's great. Have the bigger picture, but then come back down to the humility of the mouse. And a mouse can only see what the next right baby step is right in front of them. If you can't do the mouse step work, that's a great idea. It's awesome. Beautiful idea. But for it to actually shift, you have to do the little next right thing and the little next right thing. How can I show up to today with my presence and with more compassion and more love and give myself that just a little bit more? And that will ripple and that little wave will allow me to have a little bit more room for this next thing. But I love that idea of, have the big dream. And what are your little mouse steps to help you get there?
Yeah, well, look, you showed up. You showed up with all your presence today. You've given so much of your heart to this work.
First off, thank you so much for allowing me to be here, for your beautiful questions, for the space you hold. I feel really honored that I've gotten to meet you and that our paths have crossed in this life.
Thank you, Ruthie. Thank you for joining. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in again for another episode of Evolutionary, the podcast. And if you haven't yet, make sure you share this podcast episode with a friend that could use a little bit of hope and a little bit of healing.
Thank you, sweet friend.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I really encourage you to pick up her book called There I Am, The Journey from Hopelessness to Healing. It's a memoir that you can find anywhere. There's links in the show notes of this episode to her book. And also, you can check the show notes for links to her website, which is ruthielindsey.com. You can also find her on Instagram at Ruthie Lindsey. And then you can check out her Substack, incredible Substack page, and search for her on Substack and invite you to join her newsletter as well, her e-newsletter. And thanks for tuning in today, everyone, for another episode of Evolutionary. I hope you are well, and I hope you are finding ways to find peace and tranquility and balance in the world. I hope. Evolutionary, restoring balance and healing the natural world is brought to you by me, Hawah Kasat. If you would like to find out more about me and my story, head to hawah.us. That's HAWAH.US. And then make sure to search for me in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you for listening. Stay in touch. Peace.